I did want to look at a couple of Tucker Carlson clips. Tucker Carlson is really working hard to somehow try to defend what Vladimir Putin is doing. And most recently on his program last night, he spread debunked conspiracy theories about Ukraine. That probably doesn't surprise too many of you.
Last night, we told you that the Biden administration is funding a number of secretive biolabs in Ukraine.
Now, that's a lie.
Labs that are conducting experiments on highly dangerous pathogens. Now, that's...
Yeah. So the U.S. has worked with Ukrainian labs on public health research, as they have with so many different countries. The idea that the U.S. is funding dangerous, secret Ukrainian biolabs is simply not true.
It's not a story, as we told you, that we wanted to do.
Well, it was a lie, so you shouldn't have done it.
In fact, we didn't think it could be true.
And it's not, yeah.
So over the top and bizarre. And in any case, the administration had repeatedly and very aggressively denied that they were doing anything like this.
I think what Tucker says is, how is Ukraine allowed to have scientists? Yeah, so as the New York Times explains, Carlson is conflating Ukrainian biodefense labs with biological weapons facilities. Ukraine has the former, it does not have the latter.
And then they attacked anyone who asked questions about it as a tool of Russia. We foolishly assumed that in this one instance, they might be telling the truth.
It's an insane show. Let's continue.
In fact, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev has acknowledged joint American and Ukrainian research on other pathogens, such as hemorrhagic fever virus. Apparently, there's a lot of this going on in Ukraine, funded by the United States. Did you know that?
There's a lot of this going on all over the place. Remember, guys, it's like, you know, at a certain point, you'd think these people would be like, there were labs in China researching stuff, and there's labs in Ukraine researching stuff. In this case, the labs in Ukraine don't have anything to do with the Russian invasion. It's almost like there's labs all over the world researching stuff, and sometimes the U.S. partners with other countries and research is done. Wow. Wow. Then, of course, Tucker brings on Glenn Greenwald, who he described as an expert in detecting deception. What does that even mean? Here's a little bit of Glenn Greenwald, who, I mean, has gone dangerously off the rails.
Last question, maybe you don't know the answer, but why Ukraine? You know, of all the countries you would conduct this kind of research in, you would pick one with like a solid...
They didn't pick one. See, this is the problem. They didn't pick one. Just because he's only talking about Ukraine, because Ukraine's in the news, nobody picked Ukraine. In fact, for a year or two, the problem was we were doing research in China with Chinese labs. Remember how nobody picked Ukraine?
Medical infrastructure. You'd pick Germany or Israel or someplace with, you know, first-class scientific research going on. You would
Which
not
is being
pick
done.
Ukraine. Why Ukraine?
Unless you viewed Russia as your primary threat, unless you wanted to be provocative toward the Russians, unless you wanted to...
Man, this is like very serious brain rot. Very, very serious brain rot.
Be in Ukraine developing all sorts of weapons, as we clearly have been. We've been flooding that country with lethal arms for...
So we've provided, it's true, we've provided Ukraine with weapons. Trump tried not to because he wanted dirt. But then thanks to Vindman, Trump ended up having to... Every one of these statements is either deceptive or lacks context or is a lie. Now he's confused. We have given Ukraine weapons, and you can be against that. It's okay to be against that. But to say that that has anything to do with research labs that don't make weapons, it's really something.
For 5 or 6 years. So clearly there's an intention for the United States to be heavily involved in Ukraine. The Russians say their motive is to be threatening and provocative. The United States denies that, but they have their tentacles in Ukraine and have for many years all the time, which is a critical part of the narrative that has been lacking.
That's right. It's fair.
If you watch this stuff, you would come away thinking all sorts of things are taking place that are not taking place. Carlson then pivoted to wrestling with strawmen who want the U.S. to start World War III. But the only example of a pro-no-fly zone elected official is a Republican. Yeah. One person calling for a no-fly zone immediately became increased calls for a no-fly zone. It's not the only suffering in the world.
The suffering in Ukraine are real. Some of them are incredibly heart-wrenching. It's not the only suffering in the world, but it's real suffering. The argument from limited people like Maria Salazar is, well, people are suffering, we have to commit arms. You've been in conflicts firsthand. Does our committing arms necessarily relieve the suffering on the ground? That's their assumption. Is it true?
No, not whatsoever. No.
And of course, that's not even really the argument. I mean, it's just none of this makes sense, guys. None of this makes sense. Let's listen to the situation in Florence, South Carolina.
Even the Nelk Boys record-setting interview with me was taken down because I told the truth.
Okay, so she's reading a Trump statement, and then Newsmax is in a commercial right now. Okay, all right, fair. We're going to continue. We have plenty of things to do. Thanks to Dave Sykes for the Twitch Prime subscription, number 16 today. Really appreciate that. The Hand says with a very generous super chat, after millions of Americans not understanding basic science with COVID and the rise of fascism with Trump, I'm disappointed in our democracy and afraid of the right's tyranny. Feeling lost, where do I go from here? We're all trying to figure out the answer to that. We're all trying to figure out the answer to that. I don't know where we go from here. Exactly Right says, you say Tucker's lying about biolab weapons, but you don't actually know that. You're not privy to classified information, talking out of your ass. Yeah, but exactly right. That's a very, it's quite frankly, a very ignorant thing to say. That's like saying, if I come on the show and I go, listen, thanks for the $5, by the way. Yeah, it's very, extreme ignorance. If I come on the show and I go, listen, imagine Fox News was claiming that, let me come up with an example. Imagine Fox News was claiming that Joe Biden was involved in supporting forced child labor in mines in Ecuador. Okay, like imagine that Fox News was reporting that on an opinion program, without citing any actual sources. And I said to you guys, yeah, that's just not true. There's no evidence of that. You can always go, you haven't been to every square mile of Ecuador. You can't be sure of that. Right, but we don't have any evidence of that. We have no evidence for what Tucker is saying. Do most people understand that? Like, yes, of course, anything could be going on, but Tucker has no evidence that it is going on. And if you claim something is taking place, the burden of proof is on you. Do you understand? Exactly right is not exactly right. It's not on me to search out for evidence disproving. There's just no evidence that supports that. If you're claiming something, you have to provide the proof. Come on, guys. Give me a break.